Welcome back everyone. Today we're gonna be making a firewood log carrier. This is a super simple project. It's very similar to making an apron. I'm gonna be walking you through each step, what supplies to use, and even a printable pattern. So if you're new to sewing, you should have no problem following along. With all that being said, don't forget to grab the printable pattern and let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you'll need 2 yards for your main fabric, and I recommend using a canvas or a very heavyweight material. I'm going to be using a wax canvas for the outside layer and just a regular heavyweight canvas for the inside. But like I always, have some fun with it, test different fabrics out, and let me know how it goes. You'll need 2 50-inch strips of leather. This is going to be used for the straps going across and the handles. And if you don't want to use leather, you can use webbing instead. If you go the webbing route, I recommend getting 1.5-inch width and about 2 to 4 yards. You'll need 2 D-rings, and these can vary. You can get 1 to 1.5-inch width. It really depends on how wide you're gonna make the strap on top. I went with the 1-inch strap, so I used 1-inch D-rings. This extra strap on top is optional, so if you don't wanna add it, you don't need the D-rings. And lastly, you'll need your pattern. The pattern is available at properfitclothing.com. It's super easy to use. All you have to do is download it, print it off, tape it together, and you're ready to go. Before you tape it together, the best thing to do is to cut off the top and one of the side edges. This is gonna allow you to overlap the pages for a perfectly aligned pattern. And after you have all your supplies gathered and your pattern printed out, it's time to move into cutting.
And after printing out your pattern, it should look like this. Be sure to check your printer alignment for the best possible results. From here, we're gonna cut on the outside of the black line. After cutting out your pattern, you should end up with 2 axe blade pocket panels, both cut out of your main fabric. And again, I'm using 2 different fabrics. You can use 1 fabric for the whole project. You can also replace the fabric with 1 leather cut. 2 pocket panels, both cut out of your main fabric. 2 leather strap cover panels, both cut out of leather. And if you're not using leather, you can replace the material with vinyl. And lastly, 2 main body panels cut out of your main fabric on the fold. If you don't have enough material to cut on the fold, you can just reflect the panel across your fabric and you'll get the same results. Moving on to assembly, we're going to start by grabbing the axe blade pocket panel, locate the seam allowance guide on the pattern, place the right sides together, and we're going to stitch just the top and bottom edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After stitching, we're going to flip the right sides out, lining up the outside edges. If you are using a wax material like this, it's very easy to correct these creases simply by using a heat gun. But from here, we're going to add a top stitch to both of the top and bottom edge. If you're looking for a nice even stitch, I recommend using an edge presser foot. Real quick before we move on, if you are using leather, all you have to do is cut it out in the same size and you only need 1 piece. And the benefit of using a leather is that the axe blade won't rip the fabric over time, so it's something to think about if you're trying to make a super durable bag. But for now, we can place this panel off to the side and grab the pocket panel. For this pocket, we're going to be doing the same exact thing. Locate the seam allowance on top and bottom, place the right sides together, and stitch the top and bottom edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After stitching, flip the right sides out, lining up the top and bottom edge, and add a top stitch. I also recommend matching the thread color to your fabric color to hide any imperfections. We can place this panel to the side and grab the main body panel. Before we place the pockets, I want to quickly show you 2 different ways you can make this carrier. You can make it using bias tape, and that's what I'm going to do with the wax material, or you can just sew the panels together and avoid using bias tape. And that's the one I'm going to start with. So I have my 2 panels. I'm going to place the right sides together, lining up the outside edge, place a few pins, and we're going to stitch all the way around the outside edge, leaving about a 2 to 4 inch gap in the bottom. We're going to use that opening to pull the right sides out, so you want to make sure you give yourself enough space. And we're sewing this panel at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After finishing up the stitch, locate the opening in the bottom edge, and we're going to flip the right sides out. Push out all the corners, go back to the opening, and we're going to roll the fabric in on itself so the right sides are together. To keep it nice and even, it's best to place a couple pins on this opening. Once you're ready, we're going to add a top stitch all the way around that outside edge. This is a super long stitch, so it's really hard to keep it straight all the way around. That's why I recommend using an edge presser foot. It'll keep the needle the same distance from the edge all the way around, ultimately giving you a more professional finished end product. And the reason we sewed these panels first before adding the pockets is to essentially bind these layers together so they don't open up, because if you add the pockets to one layer then sew these panels together, it might start pulling apart like this as you're carrying logs. So I find it's best to set the pockets after assembling, because those pockets are going to bind the 2 layers together and make it as one. But from here, the rest of the assembly is the exact same. If you are using the sewing technique, just follow along in the same order. But for now, I'm going to place the sewn panel off to the side and continue with the bias tape panel. I'm going to be using the wax fabric as my outside fabric and the canvas as my inside. So we're going to place the wrong sides together. The first thing we want to do is start setting the pocket, so we're going to grab the pattern, locate the strap placement guides, and simply just mark those out with chalk. Do it on the top and bottom of the panel, reflect it over the center, and do the same thing on the opposite top side. Place the pattern off to the side, grab a ruler or edge that extends across the entire panel, and chalk out each one of the strap guides. Grab the pattern again, double check the strap guides to see if everything lines up, and from here we're going to mark out the center pocket and the X blade panel. To fold the pattern at the bottom of the pocket panel, place it back on the fabric, chalk out the bottom edge from the X holder to the pocket. Chalk the side edges of the pocket, fold the pattern at the top of the pocket panel, chalk the top edge and the sides. Spin the pattern to the bottom and chalk out the side edges of the pocket. And you don't need to chalk out every single edge, I just find it helpful. If you're concerned about the axe handle placement, this is done at the end. Same goes for the center strap and the cover panel. Feel free to mark them out if you want, but it's easier to place them after we place the straps. Next, grab your complete pocket and X blade panel. Using the guides, we're going to place the pocket in the pocket placement and the blade in the blade placement. The bottom edges of both panels should line up. Place a few pins. And another customization you can make, you can actually add this assembly to both sides of the pattern. I'm just adding it to one because I don't need a pocket on both sides, but it's a good way to customize it to your exact use. And before we start sewing, just double check, make sure you have the wrong sides of the fabric together. I also like to place a few pins on the opposite end of the body panel just to keep things from moving around. Keep in mind these are pockets, so we're not going to be sewing the top edge, we're going to be sewing the sides and the bottom edge. The sides you can sew at 1/4 inch, and for the bottom, I recommend sewing directly on top of the top stitch. After stitching, double check to make sure everything is lined up and looking good. We can place this panel off to the side and grab our leather roll. If you're not using leather or vinyl, you can skip ahead. We're going to be using this leather to cut out our straps and our handles. To get nice clean cuts, try using a rotary cutter. We'll be cutting the straps first, and we want these to be at least 50 inches or longer. I'm also cutting them at 1.5 inch width. You can play around with the width, but it's best not to go below 1.5 inches. Again, if you don't have leather, a heavyweight vinyl works just as good too. After cutting one strip, grab the main body panel, place the strip within the placement guide, and check to see if it extends past the outside edges. When you're working with leather, you don't want to waste a lot of it, so it's best to check this before moving on. If everything is looking good, you can continue to cut 3 more strips, making 4 total. If you're looking for the exact measurements I used, I cut 2 50-inch strips and 2 29-inch strips. The 29-inch strips will be used for the handle, and that's separate from the strap. You can actually adjust this to the handle size you prefer. I started by cutting mine a little bit longer and trimmed them down to 29. After cutting, you can place them off to the side, grab your main body panel and your 2 29-inch strips. And if you're wondering, I'm using a veg tan leather. Typically you dye this and coat the edges, but I really like the look of it as it weathers naturally, so I'm just gonna leave it unsealed. And it's more of a test just to see how it does over time. Also, these strips are not cut down to 29 inches just yet because I want to show you how you can adjust the handle. So the handle is going to be above attached with strap adjusters, but you still want to line it up on the strap placement guides. And when you move that strap back and forth, the handle gets longer or shorter. You mainly want to give yourself enough room so that when you have logs in it, it will wrap around to the other handle and it's easy to carry. And after playing around with it, I decided to cut it at 29 inches. So feel free to come up with your own measurements and tell me how they worked. And this is not just going to be a flat handle, we're going to roll the wrong sides together and stitch directly on the edge to make something similar to a purse handle. And there are a few different ways you can do this. You can just roll it and stitch it, or you can add some sort of insert to give it more of a structure and a handle feel. For the video, I'm just going to roll it and stitch it and see how it turns out. This leather is fairly stiff, so I know it's going to have enough structure in that handle and it won't just kind of bend and look wonky. I'm going to be starting the stitch at 7 inches on the inside and ending at 7 inches to the opposite side. I found this was the perfect amount of handle if you're using a 29-inch strip. If you have access to a walking foot sewing machine, I recommend using that when you're working with leathers. Also, be sure to do a nice tack stitch at the start and stop so it doesn't unravel over time. And after completing the stitch, try folding them, see how it looks. Mine has a little bit of bend, so that's where that structure comes into play. Adding an insert can help reduce some of those bends and make it look more full. Another fun thing to make it very durable is adding double-sided rivets at the start and end stitch just to lock those layers together. We'll be adding those in future steps, so you can wait to add them. But for now, we can place the complete handles off to the side, grab the main body panel and our 50-inch straps. And this is why we want them 50 inches, because we're going to be rolling that end over. To help with the placement, grab the lever strap cover panels, place them on each side of the main body in the placement area, line the cover panels up with the strap panels on both sides, and we're going to roll the end in and start to figure out the best place to start the stitch on the strap. We're going to be pulling the rolled end of the strap through the cover panel. We're going to be cutting a hole in the cover panel, so we want to determine where that hole is so we can have enough strap to pull through the cover panel. First, trim each strap flush to 50 inches so they're all symmetrical. Lay them out with the cover panels on top. And I know we're kind of going back and forth, but it's really important to keep these straps exactly the same length. The next thing we're going to do is measure out where we're going to make the opening on the cover panel and then make that mark on the strap. And for the exact measurement, it was 5 inches in from the strap end. Add this mark to both sides of each strap. Grab your strap adjusters or strap sliders. I'm using 1.5 inch width to match my 1.5 inch width strap. Slide the strap through the bottom opening, roll the end over, and connect the previous mark across the strap. And I'm just doing this so I have a guide to make an even stitch across that strap. To make it easy, we're only doing one strap at a time, so place the opposite one off to the side. And before you start stitching, it's key to note that the end of the strap goes past your stitch guide. And this is because you want that loop to be locked in. From here, we're going to stitch all the way around the outside edge in a box formation. I'm using an edge presser foot to get a nice even stitch all the way down that strap. This stitch is very visible and it's actually part of the design, so you want to make sure you make it nice and neat. After finishing up the stitch, double check, make sure everything is looking good. Since the top of the stitch will be covered, you can actually go back and do a couple more tack stitches to really lock it down. But from here, we're going to grab the second strap and repeat the process. The second one can be a little bit harder because you want to make sure you line up the straps perfectly with the opposite side. I found a good technique is using spray-on adhesive to help keep that strap in place. Just spray it on the strap, line it up with the opposite strap, let it set, and it won't move around as you're stitching. But go ahead and stitch that strap on, and once you're finished, double check, make sure the outside edges line up. If they don't line up, I recommend dethreading and trying again. From here, we're going to grab the leather strap cover panel. I'm using the same leather I did for the strap. It's not as thick of a leather, so it's easy to sew it over the other straps. Sometimes if you're using very thick leather, it gets super bulky and it's hard to work with. Place the cover panels in the guides lined up with the straps. And this is where the previous strap markings come into play. We're going to be marking above the stitch on the strap so we can pull that end through the cover panel. You want to make this marking at least a 1/2 inch above the stitch so that way the stitch doesn't pull through the opening. Make a parallel marking on the opposite side of the cover panel and repeat the whole process for the second cover panel. To get perfect openings in the leather, I'm going to be using a die punch. The opening on this one was about 1/4 inch, which was perfect, but the length was a little bit small. But that's okay because you can make one punch and then you move it to the side and make your second punch. If you're looking to make a lot of these, you will want to find a die set so you don't have to double up on each punch. It's really easy to do. All you do is place the die on your opening and hammer it down. They are fairly sharp, so you'll want to place something on the opposite side so you don't ruin your table. Grab the main body assembly, the cover panels, and slide the strap ends through the cover panels. My strap sliders were a little bit wider than the opening, so it took a little time pulling it through, but in the end it worked out great. Repeat this step for the opposite cover panel, and before we start sewing, we want to line the top edge of the cover panel up with the outside edge of the main assembly. And then we're going to add a top stitch around the outside edge the same way we did it for the strap. And I'm not sewing the top edge because we're going to be adding bias tape, so that edge will be sealed off. After finishing up the stitch, double check, make sure the cover panels are lined up perfectly with that outside edge, and the inside stitch is looking nice and neat. To jump quickly back to the sewing technique, if you did sew the panels together in the beginning, you will want to stitch that outside edge. Because in this technique, we're not going to have that bias tape on the outside to cover up that raw edge. So make sure you stitch all the way around that cover panel if you chose to go with the sewing route. But anyways, moving on, the next step is adding the bias tape. Before we add the bias tape, I quickly want to note you can actually add another layer to the inside because as you can see, there are stitches on the opposite side. If you don't like seeing the stitches, all you do is cut another main body panel, place it on the opposite side with right side up, and carry on with your bias tape. At this point, it won't unfold if you have logs in there because you have enough weight and material that it's going to stay together. I'm not going to be adding that extra inside layer, but it's an option if you want it. Place a few pins to keep the layers lined up, and then add your bias tape all the way around that outside edge. I'm using a bias tape attachment that you attach to your machine and it automatically adds the bias tape. This is the quickest way to go if you plan on making a lot of these, but it's not the only option. You can use bias tape making kits, or you can buy pre-made bias tape. To finish off the bias tape, I go past the start point, take the excess amount of material, roll it inwards to make a clean edge, and add a tack stitch. And another tip, since this is a large circumference, it's hard to get a big enough strip to go around the entire thing, so I actually sewed 2 strips together. But anyways, moving on, the next step is adding the handles. Slide the handle end through the second opening in the strap slider, and this is just going to be the flat part. Roll the end over twice, and you can either tack stitch these layers together or add rivets. And when you roll this leather twice like this, it gets a little bit chunky, so it's hard to stitch. That's why I'm going to be using double-sided rivets. I'm going to be adding 2 to each strap end, so the first thing you want to do is mark out where you want them so they're evenly spaced apart. Since we are going through 3 layers of leather, I'm using just a little leather punch. This one is designed for the size of the rivet, and they typically come with the kit when you buy them. Line up all 3 of the layers and punch out both of your holes. You can punch out the layers separately, but this ensures that they'll line up perfectly. Feed the strap end back through the opening, add your rivets. To secure them down, I'm going to be using a grommet press. You can either use a grommet press, a hand press, or even a hammer die. Repeat the exact same steps for the rest of the handle ends. As you can see, using the rivets really makes for a secure handle, overall allowing you to carry a lot of logs, which is a lot of weight. I also want to point out, if you didn't use leather or vinyl, you can still do this exact same technique using webbing. And the other nice thing about using rivets is that if it doesn't turn out the right size, you can just cut them off and try again. The last step, we're going to be adding the loops to hold the axe handle. And this is easily done by using your own axe, because axes do come in different shapes and sizes. So it's best to slide your axe in and kind of build it from there. And you can add it towards the outside edge, or you can add it directly on the straps, and that's what I'm going to be doing. Cut about an 8-inch strip at 1.5 inch width to match the width of the strap. Line the axe handle up parallel with the pocket. Pull the axe handle so it's at the bottom of the loop and make that mark. Again, you can stitch this on with a box stitch, or you can use double-sided rivets. And that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be securing it down with double-sided rivets. And keep in mind, we are going through all of the layers. The next step to making it even is putting the axe back in the holder, pulling the strap around the handle, and seeing where the handle falls and trying to make that handle even with the pocket. Once you found that sweet spot, you can either sew it down or secure it down with double-sided rivets. And like I said before, this does take a little bit of playing around with, because axe handles come in different shapes, sizes. So for the best results, it's nice to have an axe on hand to get it lined up right. With the handle holder secured down, throw the axe in and see how it holds it. As you can see, when the axe rests at the bottom, it's perfectly even with the top edge of that pocket. And you can also add a second strap holder on the opposite strap. But for the time, we're going to keep the video moving and add the center strap. I'm using 1-inch D-rings with a 1-inch strip of leather. I cut the leather to about 4 inches in length, feed it through your D-rings, roll the edges over twice, and place it in the center in between both of the straps on the cover panel. I'm going to be securing this down with double-sided rivets, so lay the panel out flat so you don't hammer through the opposite side of the body panel, and add the double-sided rivet. And this is a very simple, easy to use center strap technique. You can use different buckles or closures, but I'm just going to be adding a 20-inch strip on the opposite side, and these will feed through the D-rings, and you pull it and it secures shut. It's easy to get in and it's easy to get out. For the placement of the strap, you want it directly lined up in the center, the same as the D-rings, and you want it parallel with those D-rings, or it's going to be offset when you feed the strap through the D-rings. Once you have it lined up, secure it down with rivets. I use 2 rivets on the strap side so it doesn't slide back and forth. And the biggest thing to note is to make the strap long enough to give yourself plenty of room for logs, because you can always trim it down if it ends up too long. And the final step is adding your branding. I use leather added with double-sided rivets to keep the theme going throughout the carrier. I also added a second loop handle. This is because the head of the axe was a little bit heavy and it kind of fell out, so adding that second loop really secured it down. And if you're looking to make a larger bag, it's very easy to do. All you do is extend it at the fold to make it longer, and then you extend it in the middle to make it wider. You can do this and still keep the same strap pocket configuration. The only thing you might have to do is adjust the axe holder to the outside edge, but other than that, it's pretty simple. And definitely leave in the comments if you come up with a good configuration for the axe handle holder. I found going directly on the straps worked great, and it held it perfectly even.
And there you have it, your Firewood Log Carrier is complete. Hopefully yours turned out good. I definitely want to see how they turned out, so tag me on Instagram at Properfit Clothing. Also, let me know if you used webbing on yours or different types of leather that worked really good, or any other random. But like always, I'm going to keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.